Silence. Nothing but the overbearing and massive weight of dread and regret that washes over one's soul. Time wasted, words unspoken, little to no actions made, and all without even the slightest streak of light that is comfort, safety, and peace. This is the effect of the calm. Every day, hour, minute, and even second, danger looms around every corner of our reality. Even within the deepest and seemingly empty pits of the great solar phenomena, there's always something soaring, aimlessly or pinpointed, hoping to discover, pass through, or even wait for something to fall right within its grasp before tearing it apart. Even if it doesn't succeed, the danger it can show is far greater than one might comprehend. Whether it be on a personal level, among groups, or even worldwide, we face more of it in our day-to-day life than we have a right to. And sometimes we don't even realize that we, too, could be the cause behind some of it. Let it be a simple mistake that we may or may not be able to make amends for, an intentional act that we truly believe is the right thing, or even the malicious undertakings of someone so self-centered, regardless of accountability, that their actions could never be forgiven by anyone. We, and by extent our world, can be dangerous. But no matter who it is, or what it is that they do, no living person on this planet is perfect in every way. Even we can admit to that, because with all we have done, all that we have stood for, and all that our good-willed souls continue to hold on to through the many years we've existed for, we still failed all the lives that we swore to protect on this planet. Those that are gone, we cannot make amends for the people that knew them. Those caught in this new herd mentality will stop at nothing to survive in their own manner. Though they will try to prey on the vulnerable, they'll run away all the same before trying to strike again. And those that want nothing but our own end to be met, we pity them. Even when the day comes that we still make things right, there's no guarantee that they'll look past the mistakes and forgive the people that stand behind them. If they really believe we and the world deserve punishment, we can understand that. But we can't accept it, because the world needs us, and if there are those that will try to strike us down because of a mistake so trivial or grand, even though we're still fighting for the ones still suffering, then the true evil has identified itself. We will not be bound by self-discourse any longer in this new storm, and we will not stand by those that have no humanity left in their soul. The world will judge you as you have judged it. Such is the day the storm before the calm emerges. What does it take for a monster to present itself? Some believe that the only way for one to show their true colors in that light is through their actions. But in some circumstances, that couldn't be any further from the truth. The stakes are a common act amongst us all, even those outside the humankind perimeter. And yet, because we have certain rules, certain morals, and certain expectations to be followed, it practically means that any other minute act after another will forever shape you as the monster they see in their eyes. There is a line, that much is clear, but even the simplest petering into that direction isn't a sign of malice or a clear stance of where their beliefs lie. Even the wisest of our kinds were no stranger to this, and the many times they've been called out for not following the ideals and morals that influencers put into place as a frame of the world's rules. And yet those that listen to them are completely ignorant to the fact that even those same people may have slipped and done the same thing at one point in their life. It puts them in a bind, continuing to believe what they've been told and be the better person by calling out all their former inspirations' flaws, regardless of whether it reflects their present image or not. The line of any action is practically invisible, and while there is good to be found in showing a bad egg for who they truly are, there's no time being given for those willing to or already going through the steps to change. As difficult as it is to establish trust and distinguish between the good and bad, it's no different than the witch-hunting trials of long ago, and who were the real monsters in the end. The only reason we've wanted to move on from those days was by having more humanity, and thorough judgment of one's actions, mental psyche, and whether they're getting the help they need if deemed necessary or rightfully deserved. And yet, when the world went through its biggest change yet, most fingers once again pointed to the opposite side without any thought or hope that things could be different. So that leaves me to ask, once again, what does it take for a monster to present itself? What would it take for us to become unified again? It's the first question that ever crossed my mind when we were left to observe the struggling world we swore to protect, even before it fell to the quake. Humanity has always struggled to become codependent of one another, led by the facts that those before would teach them in their youth, and all with their own individual viewpoints. Sometimes we wonder if life would be any better if we were all under the same mindset. But it's a difficult scenario to imagine when everyone's perspectives of peace comes with many different stipulations. Anyone could look at one person and think they're important and trustworthy enough to be the shining image of what our way of life should follow. But they'll either overlook or completely ignore the goals that put many others in grave danger. Many beliefs are led by assumption. We know this better than anyone, as for us it was always about striving to do the right thing. But such a task is not easy when others will turn the other way because you're not strong or brave enough to take the risks needed to make it happen. Some goals require action, but fighting was always a last resort, as our capabilities would certainly turn the tide in this battle for our planet, but the last thing we want is for all of life to look at us in more fear than they already do. Especially when there are adversaries who could use said fear to divide us even further. It's why we take the small steps to plant the seed that will blossom into a new and prosperous life for all to flourish in. But that seed could also make way for a world built on the lies of the wrong hands that hold it. from bothering. It's not like you can hear me. All these feelings, thoughts, memories all built up after so many years of trying to stay ahead and keep spirits high. And I can't express any of them. No one should have to see me this way. Not even Duncan knows the half of it. Every time I see someone undergo the most horrifying pain they have to endure, no effort I'm capable of is able to put them on a right track mind. I feel helpless. And I know you're the only one out there who could ever understand what that's like. I know it's not even worth the effort, but I have to ask, am I at fault? Is everything I've done up until this point been of any real value? I know I can't keep sitting like this forever. I realize this, but I can't let them go. I'm afraid that the moment I send anyone to find that damn seed, they'll suffer an even worse fate than you. All you did for us, it was in your duty as an outsider, like the story's told. And yet I still feel at fault for letting any of your kind be put in this lifeless husk state. Will you even wake? Are you awake? I suppose it doesn't matter. I don't deserve to know these answers. All I can really say now is, before this storm ends, if I failed you, if I let you down in any way that would cause you to turn your head away from us at any point, from me, I'm so horribly sorry. I'm so sorry. And if you're somehow truly able to hear me and forgive me, don't tell me. It's the only way I'll learn. Rest well, outsider. I'm not sure how to start this. I don't even know if I want to. But I've spent over a year holding on to all of these reports, witnesses, and even mere stories regarding people's experiences in this new world. None I could ever possibly relate to in any shape or form that doesn't have anything to do with the force that's towered over our heads since the beginning. It simply doesn't compare to what's right in front of them. I would never truly know or understand no matter how hard I would try to empathize with them. But now, I can no longer deny it. The world has changed. Some for the better, and most certainly for the worst. The only reason humanity has held on for so long is because they're not the only ones that had to. And they've needed so much time to coexist with one another. Whether they wish to help each other, fight for what's theirs, or simply hope to survive, we've entered a new era of life on this planet. And the fact we've done so little, it's caused the rest of humanity to take action into their hands. But no matter their capabilities, they can't do this alone anymore. And now I've seen it for myself. I'm going to share a story with you, to whoever's listening, about the first advancement we've made since Zero Day. This is not my own story, though. This is of one who cannot tell it themselves in their current state, and only I can tell it on their behalf. This is the story of the Outsider, their journey to us, and what became of them. The Outsider is a title granted to our most dedicated followers over the years. They hold no name, no past, no other detail of their identity, not just by their own desire to remain in anonymity, but because all they've done for us over the years hold great importance in our growth as an order, and any indicator of who they truly are would be detrimental on every front. Every one of our leaders, past and present, have encountered their own iteration of the Outsider across the world, and not one is ever the same. It's never any ordinary person either, and it's not known why they help us in this vein or what started this tradition. But even without the starting pages, the tale of the Outsider is an often respected one amongst the Order, and most saw no reason to question its legitimacy due to how much aid they provided. Though considered a blessing by few, there were no indications that the Outsiders were more than miracle workers. Of the records we hold on them within the Ethikive, none speak of their capabilities in combat, expeditions, or communication. As far as anyone else knows, they're nothing more than human like the rest of us. So when the Zero Day fell upon the planet, we were led to believe that there was no likely chance any of the Outsiders could have survived the surge of feral and hybrid activity. Billions were lost in the aftermath, and there was little to no word on their whereabouts anywhere in the world, with their last form of communication being the final piece to a mysterious puzzle targeted towards multiple members and followers on the day of the quake. Since then, there was nothing but silence, much like we would be in the year that followed. That was until our final public broadcast of the remaining survivors within the Americas, when we received word a figure was approaching the safe zone near the sanctuary, equipped with nothing more than a gas mask and a machete. We were just surprised to see anyone take such a long endeavor to reach the start of the trail. Or maybe they didn't come far at all. And just before stepping past the bridge, though, our hearts began to sink when a hybrid stepped in their path. A HF Canopyrus. We assumed they wouldn't get much further, but to our surprise, they didn't stop walking. Even with the beast right before them, they didn't budge or flinch, not even looking like they'd used the weapon. The hybrid sprinted towards them, and before it could make impact, the figure charged and stepped right on top to jump over the towering creature before continuing to walk. They didn't want to fight it, at least not start to anyway. The creature turned around and sprinted again, but before it could even get a grab at them, they dug right underneath and plunged the blade right into its spine. The The creature fell, whimpering for mercy, to which the figure pulled the blade out, approached them from the front, and granted its wish. The beast was dead, and the figure turned across the gap after a few seconds of observing the hybrid's dead corpse. Out of respect, understanding. Clearly this wasn't their first, and only someone with this kind of extensive knowledge could have survived this long in the open. It wasn't clear, but I knew from my hunch. It has to be them. They started the climb without a second to consider the path nor the journey. Hours passed with many updates on their progress coming in. Past the first long incline up, atop the heavy hill, down into the forest of regret. They never once stopped, never once tired. This was someone who had already come to terms with their fate and past over years of time without needing to simmer. Whoever this outsider was, they've always been taking the climb. And here they were, looking for the true answers so that they could continue to further aid us in their duty. They were just as lost as the rest of the world, but they knew more than we could ever fathom. Their faint silhouette through the fog became visible. I could see them from my lookout, security cameras anyway, and made haste to the main hall. Upon being processed through the first gate, the doors opened, and for the first time in possibly years, an outsider set foot into our sanctuary. I began to give them the full details of what became of our world, in addition to introducing them formally to our order. There was a lot to unpack, but I wasn't going to waste any time before giving them what they sought. After some time to rest, we made our way to the Ethic Hive, as I told them the story of our origins. I could tell they had many questions, but they spoke not a word and listened very intently with great intrigue as they gazed at the last surviving exhibit of the first belief. Upon arriving in the treasury, they set foot in the virtual projection system to observe the many witnesses of the disaster, and all that followed for no longer than an hour. Before stepping out. Clearly they were disoriented, but it seemed they expected such. It had been a year since this all began. I led them to the living quarters for the rest of the night, and while we believed their presence would be the only extraordinary event to transpire in the following days, we were met with an opportunity to prove themselves. A signal was detected a few miles from the sanctuary from a member we thought had been lost when the creatures swarmed the sanctuary on that fateful day. Not only was he alive and well, the images of his status brought great intrigue for us. The world had been infested with miasm after I knew that all human life had taken the advice to equip themselves with facial covers to avoid their own cognitive decay. But yet nothing of the sorts when contacting us. Couldn't have been some kind of immunity. Could it? Coordinates were included in their message, a calling to find him. Trust for anyone outside the sanctuary was hard to come by, but not only had he managed to survive the horde, he was still cognitively capable of reaching out for help. But a whole year? Something about this seemed off. And when the outsider overheard what was happening, they stood forth with a weapon in their hand. It seemed we had a task for them after all. To ensure everything went smoothly, we installed an optical device that showed us everything they could find. If we ourselves were going to take the initiative of stepping out there ourselves, we needed to see everything the outsider learned from their experience in the new world. They left the sanctuary through the back of the zip line, which had been rolled up to avoid any unsuspecting intruders. As it reeled down, the outsider locked their gear onto the belt, nodding to us before they slid down the mechanism to the ground. From then, they journeyed to the coordinates, and we learned so much from this expedition alone. Their encounters with the hybrids were awe-inspiring. How quickly they were able to handle the other cross-species. How they interacted with the AC variants. Every tactic they pulled was pristine, and very rarely were there any oversights on their part. But their efforts were temporarily cut when our communication ceased for a few minutes, an observation that went unexplained as the destination was in clear sight. A high school. One that, despite the effects of the current climate, had still sustained most of its structure. The outsider then pulled something out of their pocket, a sheet of paper that upon closer inspection was a high school diploma. It seemed strange to note, as most, if not all, iterations of the Outsiders had always concealed any form of identity they had. We weren't sure if it was theirs or perhaps from someone they knew. And the questions only kept on coming when they entered the building. As they walked through the halls, they had small moments where they stopped short to observe their surroundings. Even the classrooms with the flipped desks and chairs, broken windows, and all other materials torn or removed from the secluded spaces. Motion seemed to imply feelings of despair, dread, and I first thought maybe they had been a student here in their past. But as the word slipped into my head, another dreadful thought returned to me in its wake, and my heart just lodged into my throat. It wasn't new to us that of all the human victims in this crisis, the children and the young adults were likely to be affected by Miasm F-22's influence the most, especially given how their minds were still developing. To think, were they all reduced to rabid creatures, victims to the hybrids, or even both? If they hadn't survived, anyway. I said not a word. This wasn't the first time I had to think about the younglings of our world, and it only made me ponder my own darker memories, but that was different. They kept on moving, passing through the cafeteria of the building and into the kitchen area, looking around for any sign of life, and yet it still seemed to be abandoned upon first glance. And then they opened the freezer. Cans, boxes, stashes of various food products were still kept reserved for a long while, and the secluded space still kept its freezing temperature, but not by much. If one of our members was truly residing here, they had to conserve all their resources to ensure their own survival, especially electricity. Then, as quick as a shooting star, the outsider turned their head towards the side door of the kitchen, as if they heard something in the distance. They slowly and quietly made their way out and through the halls before turning the corner. And there he was, limping, slouched, and with barely anything else on clothes-wise. His skin wasn't what I had imagined it to be. It looked like it had decayed for a while without any actual care given to it. It seemed like it had been completely burnt. His hair was gone, and all I could see through the outsider's perspective were the threads that kept his body together. It seemed like he was in great pain, having waited so long for someone to find him. I'm sorry. They approached, and upon the first few footsteps, he turned his head. They faced each other in the halls, past the entryway to the library, and they stared for a few seconds before the outsider made contact with American Sign Language. Couldn't respond with anything but his body language. There was just great despair in his expression, and though my face didn't show it, my very being sank upon seeing the way he shook his head upon being asked if there was anyone else. To know that the rest of the search crew with him had perished and that he was the only survivor in it all, it told me a little. But just as quick as their surprise came, a look of joy, hope, either or has lit his face completely as they gestured for the outsider to follow him. I was confused, but I went with it. Until, big a surprise any of us could have possibly imagined was presented. A blossoming seed. Through the optic, I rushed to analyze the life form, and I completely froze in astonishment. It was completely deprived of Miasm F-22. It may not mean much at first thought, but this was a tremendous discovery to take into account, as the effects of the chemical agent are only elongated by consistent ingestion. But when any filtered exposure to the agent is taken in, a majority of it within any life force can be reduced to normal. He found a way to stabilize his body without needing to protect himself. I saw the outsider's eye widen upon seeing it as well, like they knew without needing to look at it. He held it in his hands towards them, followed by their hand pointing at themselves, possibly a way of asking if he was giving it to them. And he nodded. He knew this was something that was going to aid us tremendously. But without any aid for himself, his only option was to protect it. But now, the outsider could bring it back. Duncan and I, we cried together in joy for the first time in so long after this. But in the midst of this hopeful moment, I saw the member's face turn to a frown after the outsider pointed towards him. I assumed they wanted to know if he would come along, but he shook his head. I could tell he knew that bringing back more than just this new form of life would be too big a risk, even with the outsider's capabilities. They nodded, taking the seat into his preservation chamber before wishing him farewell. And as they stepped outside to leave the building, they once again turned their head as if they heard something far out. And upon scanning the area for any life forms besides the outsider, there was nothing. He, like us, lost so much. It only made sense. I logged the report and saved the footage from their optic piece to the Ethikive. Any closure to any of our members is better than none, and we keep track of them in their honor. The outsider left the premises and traversed back into the forest to return to the sanctuary. But just as we thought we had made one great leap forward, it just had to be followed by 2 steps back. They turned their head around, clearly hearing multiple sounds around before looking directly forward and tilting their head up, and my soul went cold when they picked up the figure in the trees. I knew I couldn't communicate with them, but I yelled at the top of my lungs for them to just run as fast as they could. I couldn't let it fall into his hands, and I only grew more terrified when he jumped down and started laughing. Even with the silence, I could hear Minion's voice echo in my head as he started walking to them. I wanted members to deploy into the area, but even if we had done anything, we wouldn't have been more prepared for what was coming. Because just after a group of AC hybrids merged from behind the deity, slowly approaching as the fire and smoke emitted from each of their mouths, Canopyrus, and not just any other. These were of the Crimson Bane, a hybrid faction that had been toying with us just as much as Midian had. They invaded multiple minor sanctuaries in the state, stole weaponry, and even took from their local Ethikive databases. Of all the scenarios that crossed my mind, even the last encounter I had with him, this only made so much more sense. Only someone as powerful as he could have been given such appraisal and loyalty by these extremists as the one who triggered the quake and every event that followed. Of course, it had to be him. I was furious, though not more than scared of this revelation. But the outsider wasn't planning on sitting through this encounter any longer as they bolted away from the scene. Flames burst from the wolves' mouths as the forest was ignited, leaving little to no room for anything to escape. The outsider held tightly on the container and observed their surroundings for any way to get out of the forest, but ultimately cut short when Midian pursued them. My fists, they still clench. Just watching their perspective of the fight as they were being knocked around like a sandbag on its chain. They could barely keep up, but could still manage a few strikes with the arsenal they had, even if it was futile. They managed to knock him down for a brief moment before grabbing the plant and running past the flames, never minding it spread to their clothes. They kept going until another emission of flames made contact with a large, dead tree as it started giving away from the fire and tipping into the outsider's general direction before it knocked them down, crushed their legs. Completely stuck as the plant fell out of their arms and the ember spread to one half of their body. Minnie had stepped over the tree like it was nothing, not a single scratch or burn on him, before carefully picking up the container and putting the seed back in its spot as he closed it. He turned to the outsider with a smirk on his lips, and though I couldn't hear it, I could tell what he was saying. You should have taken better care of yourself. The pack returned to him, looking to their helpless body as the fire seeped through the clothing and onto the outsider's skin. And with their struggle, I could only imagine the screaming. The group looked down on their bottom before turning their head in the other direction. The wind started picking up, and just like that, the deity was gone. The hybrids ran. Within seconds, they were out of sight. As the trees started shaking, the fire started simmering out, and I knew what it meant. Just one glance at the lookout feed, and there it was. Superstorm Divinity. It traveled through the woods, ripping out nearly everything in its path. Nothing could have made it out of there, save for the pack. And as I looked back to the outsider's perspective, it was cut off. Our one chance. Our one glimmer of hope. Gone. We sat there for hours as the storm made its turnaround, closer to the sanctuary. There was no anger, no despair, not a single fraction of emotion to be had in that long duration of time. There was nothing. Duncan stood to take his leave, but I didn't move my spot. I just stared at that damn screen, knowing full well that I had sent someone who relied on us for years, an icon to the Scarlet Combine for even longer, to their death. I was in a dazed state, out of focus, out of mind. But then, static. And then darkness. My heart went into overdrive, begging, pleading that this wasn't just their dead body. And their eyelids fluttered open briefly. I saw the front of the rest point in the sanctuary. I gave the order for them to be brought inside. Their wounds were tended to by the guards and anyone who could provide aid of any kind before the medical staff arrived to bring them back. I made my way to the hospital wing, just sprinting as fast as I could, while my already active heartbeat quickened with worry as I pondered how severe the damage really was. The doors swung open in my presence and I saw the outsider lying flat on the surgery room. The doctors insisted that I wait in the observatory, but I didn't care. I needed to know. As I stood before the fallen warrior and the doctors in the midst of their procedure, I had a better look at the wounds. And while I was relieved to hear they were going to make it, the broader details of their current state still left my hope hanging on a barely sustainable rope. The left side of their body received the most nerve damage, and their face and their upper half of their torso being nearly charred off, just able to see the remaining muscle and teeth. We were able to cover them up with a synthetic material that could physically replicate the other half of the skin, but with the increasing lack of materials to completely obscure the wounds, the most we could use was a clear translucent kind. It would be easily adaptable for them, but their appearance would be forever changed. My arm and legs, on the other hand, weren't just the most burned, but also completely crushed by the tree's weight. There was no restoring them. It's not an impossible obstacle to overcome for us, but it's a difficult one regardless. By the time the procedure was complete, most of the outsider's physical state had been restored. However, another troubling predicament had surfaced. They had fallen into a coma, trapped within the middle, the divided space, the unknown. The moment it became clear, I wanted to do everything in my power to wake them up, but this close to the edge, it would have amounted to nothing. Maybe even less than that. And so, we have waited, yet again, as they lay frozen in time, discreetly sustained from the rest of the sanctuary. Only I know where they rest, and I will bundle that with the rest of my burdens to the end. But I won't wait with silence anymore. If there was anything the outsider proved to us, it's that we don't have to be afraid of the unknown. With everything we face, there is never a guarantee for success, even as the only ones that can shape things for the better. But failure is not an option anymore, nor is sulking in the depths it may have caused. We may have questioned all of our capabilities in this amount of time, not whether we can, but whether we should. And while I feel we're not ready to reach that point, there is no reason that we shouldn't stand and fight against the opposition anymore. We aren't cowards. We are the Scarlet Combine. We've protected our way of life for tens of centuries in the name of those beyond the light, and we aren't about to stop now. We may have suffered enough already, but there may be more to come. But there is no good in watching it all happen while we stand idly. This is our time to change things for the better of all life on this planet. If the world doesn't agree with us, we won't force them. But today, we continue the climb our lines have taken us. In the name of our hope, in the name of the outsider, and in the name of our world beyond the light, we will not falter until we've reached the end of our path.